Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the classics I read in 2020. One of my goals in 2020 was to read as many classics as I could, backslash as many as I wanted to. Three of these I read in school, in AP Lit, back before the pandemic hit, and the remaining 7 I chose to read. The reason I want to read as many classics as I can is because throughout my education, I personally feel, and according to my mother and many other people, I did not read as many classics as I should have in school. And so as an English major in college, I wanted to be prepared, have some background knowledge, so I'm trying to read as many on my own as I can. And for the most part, I have succeeded. It can be quite challenging, especially if you don't like the writing of a classic, to push yourself to read it and to finish it. But I'm pretty proud of myself. I did a good job. 10 classics in 1 year is respectable. Respectful. Anywho, classics are in their own category. They're their own entity because they're so well loved and because so many people have read them. And so I understand that opinions can be very strong about them. And I have some strong opinions about these, and I'm sure you guys do too. Let's be kind to one another in this new year, 2021. The first classic I read in 2020 was Hamlet. Hamlet by William Shakespeare. Again, I read this for AP Lit. We studied it in class. Just some background knowledge. I really do not like Shakespeare. I really don't like plays in general. I don't like reading plays. I like to watch them, but I don't like to read them. Ever since 8th grade, when I read my first William Shakespeare in the literature textbook, I have not been a fan. However, my junior year of high school, when I read Macbeth, I actually really enjoyed Macbeth. And so Hamlet followed along a year later, and this is my second favorite Shakespeare I've read. Second favorite Shakespearean play that I've read. I really just like the more political Shakespearean plays and the tragedies rather than the comedies and the romances. Hamlet. I really enjoyed the story. My reading experience was greatly affected by the fact that I read this in AP Lit, and I was so comfortable in that class, and we were all such good friends, and so it made reading this and reading it out loud enjoyable. And I actually volunteered. I can't remember who I read. I read one of the small parts. It was so much fun to read out loud in that class with my friends and to study it, and the teacher made it very enjoyable. And so yeah, but content-wise, it's my second favorite Shakespearean play. But like the overall experience I have around this book is my favorite. And considering it happened in January, it was one of the last bright spots of my senior year, and I will always remember Hamlet and that time of my life when I was happy. I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars, which is pretty good. Like, as a play goes, it's probably like more like a 3, but content-wise, I would say 2.5. And yes, I did have the No Fear Shakespeare version. And it helped, it really did. The next classic I have to talk about is a play, and I do not own a physical copy because when we read it in class and we were loaned copies, so I don't have it. However, it is A Doll's House. Again, I really enjoyed my experience reading this book. We made it funny, the class made it funny. I volunteered to read out loud one of the smaller parts. I remember it being funny and enjoyable, to read. Other than that, I don't remember much about it. I'm pretty sure it's said to be one of the first feminist plays. I don't know, I'm sorry. Is that wrong? It had to do with feminism and the household, I'm pretty sure. I really do not remember. It was like 10 months ago, 11 months ago. I really don't remember, but I remember it being funny. So I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. Probably looking back, I should change it to a 2 because I don't remember anything, and so therefore I clearly did not feel very attached to the story itself. Let's move on. Oh God, the next book, classic, is definitely probably my new least favorite classic I've read. Previously, prior to me reading this book, that spot was reserved for The Scarlet Letter. I really hated that book for so many reasons, mainly for the fact that I couldn't understand a word of it. But this book definitely took that place. It took that prize. And that is, once again, I don't have a physical copy. And it is Heart of Darkness. If I had it, I would shake it and make a face, but I don't have it. So. Heart of Darkness. Once again, can't remember that much about it. I remember I hated it. I remember after every single chapter, I would go to SparkNotes and have to read it because I did not retain any information. It was like, how can I describe this? It was like reading something in another language, really. You just look at it, right? You don't retain any information. You don't hear your conscious or whatever. You don't hear the words in your head. That's how I felt reading this. So I would SparkNote every single chapter and be like, oh, okay. I don't see how they got that, but sure. And if that makes me an idiot, so be it. Again, this book was not memorable. The only thing I remember is how much I hated reading it and how much I complained about reading it. Really, that's all I remember. And he was on a boat and people died. I can't even remember the guy's name. Did he have a name? I'm not sure. I'm just gonna stop talking about it. I gave it a 1.5. I feel too bad to give it a 1. You know what I'm saying? If I could, I'd give it a 0, but I feel bad, so 1.5. Okay, the next book. The next classic I read is Little Women. Little Women. I read this because in 2019, like everyone else, I saw the new Little Women with Saoirse Ronan and Emma Watson and, oh my God, what's her name? Florence. Anywho, I saw that when it came out with my friend and my mom, and I loved it. I love the movie with Winona Ryder and Christian Bale. So I really loved both those movies. I've watched the older one numerous times. It's like a comfort movie for me. I got this at my local bookstore at some point, and I wanted to read it because I was like, I love the movie. Let's read it. Unfortunately, I feel so bad saying this. Unfortunately, I liked the movies better than the book. I really enjoyed, take the really out. I enjoyed reading it, and I don't regret reading it, but I have read better classics, and I read better classics this year after reading this. The writing wasn't my favorite. It took me a long time to get into it. I remember it took me quite a while to read. And maybe that's because I have watched the movies so much, and so nothing was really new. It was very, very close. The movies really did a good job captivating. the majority of this novel. I really just didn't like the writing, I think, if I remember. Like, I could understand what was happening, but I wasn't, like, amazed by it, and I wouldn't read more of her works. Does she have more works? I don't know. I really loved the characters. They're just as lovable in the book as in the movie. I cried. If you've seen the movie, you know why I cried. I cried multiple times. I really enjoyed the character relationships and the family dynamics explored, and watching them grow up is really satisfying, and they all undergo such strong character development. It was slow at times and boring and hard to it was hard to motivate myself to pick it up and read it, because in the back of my mind I'm going, I could read something else right now. All of that being said, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I would reread it, I think. That's saying something. So, the next classic I read was Jane Austen. Was Pride and Prejudice by the famous, loved Jane Austen. This was my first Jane Austen novel. I read it because they put the movie on Netflix with Keira Knightley, and I said, I want to watch that, but I should read it first. So I read it. It was pretty good. I don't know how to sum up that thought. I definitely understand why everyone loves Jane Austen. I've heard about her my entire life. I too now feel this love for Jane Austen. I love Elizabeth and Darcy. It took me a while to really start liking Elizabeth Bennet, and I know she's this icon and everyone loves her, and she's like the best heroine of all time, and I understand that to an extent, but I really just didn't connect with her as soon as I would have liked. And I think that had to do with me getting used to Jane's writing, because it is an adjustment. Now that I have read this and I've read another Jane Austen, I feel pretty comfortable with it, but it did take me a while. There was a lot of, how should I say this, nothing that happened in this, a lot of filler, and I respect that, but at the same time, when you're reading a classic for fun and there's a lot of filler in there, it's hard to motivate yourself to read through it and to continue. So that's one of the things I didn't like about this particular book. I mean, it's relatively at the top of my favorite classics, but it's not my favorite. You know what I'm saying? I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Once again, I did like it better than Little Women. The next classic I read, the next classic, it is a book. Anyway, the next book I read was Jane Eyre. Eyre. I say ear in my head, but I'm pretty sure it's Eyre. Jane Eyre by Miss Bronte. I read this during the summer. It was a nice summer read. I would read it outside while I tanned in my backyard. Tanned. So it didn't have the highest of expectations, but gosh, they blew them out of the water, you know? Just right out of the water and over the moon. I loved this story. I loved it a lot. It's by far my favorite classic. It kicked The Great Gatsby right out of its spot that it's held for 3 years now. It went bye-bye. I liked the writing in this novel better than the writing in Pride and Prejudice. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I had already read a similarly written novel. I thought the writing was very similar, but I preferred this one. I found it easier to connect with, easier to stay engaged in, and it was easier to follow along what was happening. I loved Jane. Jane. Thought the plot was more intriguing overall because of the mystery of Mr. Rochester and his family situation and his past. I shipped Jane and Rochester, dare I say, more than I shipped Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. I'm sorry, I thought their relationship was so unique and so special, and I loved them. I really loved Jane. I've already said that. She was a great protagonist. She was a great girl. I loved seeing her grow up from this very young age into the powerful woman she became. I loved her. I loved her story. Anywho, yes, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, which is saying a lot for a classic. The next one is A Tale of Two Cities. My first Dickens. My first and quite possibly my last Dickens. Okay, before I start, can I just say, I wanted to read another classic that was a romance after I read Jane Eyre. I was in the mood. I was like, yes, give me some more. I should have just stuck with Jane Austen, but I didn't, because at the time I didn't have any more. So I went on Google and I Googled classic romances, and you know what popped up? This guy right here. And I had heard about it for a while. I always got this and Sleepless in Seattle confused for some. That sounds so stupid when I say that, because they're two, like, not even in the same universe. But there it is. So I was like, hey, I'll read it. I've got it. Let's read it. It was not a romance. I don't know who wrote that article that put this on there, but they lied to me. And therefore, I was extremely disappointed and taken aback by this book. It does have a romance, but it is not a romance, in my opinion, at all. If you compare this to Jane Eyre or Pride and Prejudice, no, not a romance, guys. This is a historical fiction about one of the French revolutions. I don't know which one it was. That's what it's about. Saying all of that, I didn't like it. Was that in large part due to my unrealistic expectations and picture I had in my mind of this book? Yes. It was really hard for me to get into it. I did not like the writing. Again, I think I had to spark note a few things, which felt foolish for me to do as I was reading it for fun. I think if I read this at a later date, when I'm in the mood for a classic and a historical fiction novel, I will like it because I love history. I'm also majoring in history. So I think I'd enjoy it, maybe. I'd enjoy the plot at least, maybe not the writing, but the plot at least would keep me interested. I did like the parallels, the dynamics between London and Paris, which are the two cities. I enjoyed that. It did make me cry. The end made me cry. Was it the end? I don't know. I remember I cried and my mom was like, "You hate this book. Why are you crying?" And I was like, I don't know. So I must have felt some level of connection with the characters and what was happening. Maybe not. I cry a lot. If you play the Lost soundtrack near me, I cry. So what does that really say about me? I gave A Tale of Two Cities 3 out of 5 stars, which is pretty average. It's in the middle of my classics list. Persuasion is the next classic I read. I really like this book. I liked this book better than Pride and Prejudice, mainly because it was shorter, and I had already gotten used to the writing, so I connected with the characters far earlier. I really liked the romance and the situation around the romance. This book is about reconnecting with a past love, and I enjoyed that concept. I read it for fun during my first semester of college. I think I read it in like 2 days. It's very short. It was a great little spike of romance, a little piece of a classic thrown in there. That's all I really have to say. I gave it a 4.5, another 4.5 out of 5 stars. Ah, yes. The next classic I read was The Picture of Dorian Gray. I think I read this kind of around Halloween, like early October. Pretty sure I read this because after I finished If We Were Villains, which is a dark academia novel I talked about in my favorites video. After I finished that book and people were talking about dark academia and this was mentioned, so I was like, hey, might as well, right? It looked pretty short. Did not feel short at all. I love me a good protagonist that is also bad and whose flaws are deeply embedded within them and are properly explored. And, you know, instead of character development, it's like character regression. They slide back. So this was kind of right up my alley. I did not like the writing that much. I think I liked it better than A Tale of Two Cities, but not by a lot. Dorian and the plot and his shenanigans, everything was very interesting to me, but because of the writing, I felt a large disconnect. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes it was hard for me to stay engaged and I would look at my phone a lot. I don't think I ever really had to SparkNotes anything. That might be wrong. Looking back, considering I read this only a few months ago, I don't remember that much about it. I really, really don't. Which means it wasn't memorable and it didn't mean a lot to me. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The last classic I finished in 2020 was Rebecca. I went to my local bookstore and I said, give me it. Only because I heard about the new movie with Armie Hammer and Lily James that came out on Netflix, I think on Halloween. I don't know why this didn't show up in the classic romance list, because duh, but it didn't. This book was pretty good. I enjoyed it. It took me a while to get through. I would read it. I read it at college. Duh. I would read it outside on the porch, and I thought I looked very English major-esque. Kind of romanticized that activity, but this book was pretty good. The writing wasn't my favorite, but I also didn't dislike it. You know, it was kind of average for me. I didn't have to SparkNotes anything. I pretty much retained everything that went on. The romance conflicted me. Sometimes I really liked them together, and other times I didn't like them together. It kind of made me uncomfortable. I don't know if that's the right word, but I just couldn't fully root for them. And I think a large part of that is due to the age difference. And I know that's like a stereotype, and I feel awful saying that. But at the same time, she was so much more immature than he was. It wasn't even really the age, like the number itself. It was the disparity between how they acted and how they saw the world, it was such a large gap. I think that's the main reason why I couldn't fully get behind it. It was very atmospheric. Manderley is quite something. I enjoyed that part. I enjoyed the mystery. It was a pretty big mystery. This was still spooky, and it was a good read. It was a good thing to read in October. It did take me a little while. I wasn't fully connected. There were times I didn't feel completely invested or engaged, and once again, I found myself thinking, could be reading something else. But I still enjoyed it. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. No, 4.5. I gave it a 4 out of 5. It's pretty good if you're in the mood for a romance that is also a classic, and you've read all of Jane Austen's works, and you've read Jane Eyre, and you've read Jane Eyre, and you don't find anything else besides this in A Tale of Two Cities, I'd recommend this one. I've been debating on whether or not I should talk about this, because I read like 40% of it in 2020. I'm just gonna give a brief overview. So this is the half of a book I read in 2020, and that is Anna Karenina. Anna? I always say Anna, but the girl who does the audiobook I'm listening to on YouTube right now says Anna, so Anna Karenina. Another romance. All I can say, I don't know where I left off, because I will say, even the free audiobook on YouTube is better than just reading this, and so I've been listening to it while I puzzle. I'm that far through. It is so long. I still have 300 pages. Oh my god, that makes me want to throw up. It's so long. There are so many conversations about farming and politics and farming. Oh my god, no. Just shut up, Sometimes I want to look at him, Mr. Leo, and say, shut up, dude. Anywho, that's where I am with this. I was really wanting to finish this before the new year, but it just did not happen. I think at that time I wasn't even halfway through. So, okay. Those were the 10.5 classics I read in 2020. I will give my final thoughts on Anna Karenina if I ever finish it. All in all, it was a pretty good year for classics. This year, I'm hoping to read more, at least 10. Let me know your favorite classics and the classics you recommend, and your least favorite classics, whatever opinions you happen to have about classics. I'm sorry if any of my opinions offended you. Once again, I know we're all very prickly about classics, but they're just my opinions, and they're prone to change in the future, especially as I study them in different ways throughout my higher education. Yes, thank you. If you take anything from this video, read Jane Eyre. Please. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a great week. If you went back to school today, filming this on Monday, January 4th, I'm sorry. My thoughts are with you. I'm so sorry. We can do it. Goodbye. Have a great day.